On October 7th, Pam Bondi, the Attorney General, she sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee and showed all of America that we're long past a constitutional crisis. Forget Article 1. Congress no longer exists as a functioning check on executive power. She didn't answer questions. Instead, she attacked the senators. And even every Republican in that room, including Chuck Grassley, 40 years in the Senate, he was there back when I was there. He didn't just sit there and let it happen. He praised her, and the rest of them let it go too. It was a public shaming of Congress's constitutional role that was, in its way, astonishing. And I know there's a lot going on, folks, not the least of which is Gaza, but let's talk about this for a few minutes, because you might have missed it. I'm Tad Sturmer. I'm an American scholar of resistance history at the University of Southern Denmark, and I'm the author of Resistance History of the United States. Bondi isn't just any attorney general, right? She's Trump's personal lawyer wearing the badge of the Justice Department. She defended him during his first impeachment. Her loyalty was never to the institution. I don't think anybody ever thought that it was. And so when she refused in the hearing to answer questions about indicting James Comey on criminal charges for his 2020 testimony to Congress, she wasn't being evasive. She was declaring her Justice Department's independence from congressional oversight. So days earlier, Trump had public ordered her to prosecute his enemies, posting, "Justice must be served now," addressed to Pam. When asked if she was the Pam he meant, she said, "I'm sure I was." But rather than focus on what she did or didn't say, think about the silence from Republicans. It tells you a lot. No one defended their colleagues. Not one defended the institution. They sat there and sanctioned the humiliation of their own branch of government, the humiliation of their own jobs. So here's a resistance history lesson we might need to understand at this moment. In 1850, Congress passed the Fugitive Slave Act. It didn't just protect slavery. It required every American citizen to participate in capturing escaped enslaved people. It made every American an agent of enslavers, complicit in supporting slavery itself. Federal commissioners got paid double for returning a black person to slavery. Federal marshals could deputize any citizen on the spot, and refusing to assist was a federal crime. What happened next? Northern states said, no. Wisconsin Supreme Court declared the federal law void, complete nullification. Vermont made it a crime to assist slave catchers, directly contradicting federal law. Massachusetts passed personal liberty laws so strict that after Anthony Burns in the early 1850s, no fugitive slave was ever captured there again. And Michigan refused to let federal authorities even use their jails. Those weren't protests. Those were state governments creating counter-institutions, resistance to federal power. So when the federal government clearly showed that it had long abandoned justice in the law, revealing the stark reality of the nature and scope of the abusive power of the First Republic, states built alternative structures of authority. Personal liberty laws weren't requests. They were declarations that federal power, when abused, had limits. But here's what's different about October 7, 2025. In the 1850s, state governments could serve as alternative power centers. Federal government was weak, it was stretched thin, it was dependent on state cooperation in many ways. Today, Project 2025 explicitly targets federal supremacy over states. The Supreme Court, stacked with Trump appointees, is already clearing the path. They're closing the exits that existed in 1850. Now, a second resistance history lesson, one that really matters. During Reconstruction, the radical Republicans understood something we must remember. Power only respects power. Abuse of authority will expand until it is pushed back. So they didn't write strongly worded letters to Andrew Johnson when he did things like veto a major civil rights bill, hoping that moral persuasion would work, appealing to nonviolence and non-resistance and a kind of pacifism as a way through. And they didn't appeal to his conscience. They didn't hope he'd respect norms. They impeached him, and they came one vote short of conviction. And when that failed, it didn't stop them. They didn't shrug and say, we'll get him next time. We tried. What do you expect us to do? They stripped the presidency of power anyway. They passed law after law over veto after veto. They used military force to protect black voters. The commanders, they listened to Thaddeus Stevens and Charles Sumner, not the president. So they stationed troops at polling places. They arrested Klan leaders. Most importantly, they took advantage of the effective suspension of the Constitution during the war to rewrite the Constitution itself, to break the First Republic once and for all. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments weren't suggestions or norms. They were constitutional hardwiring of equality, enforced by bayonets. but made possible by radical Republicans seizing a brief, unprecedented moment in our history. No Southern states in either chamber. Keep the mountain away from voting until the work was done, and make acceptance of that new Constitution, of that new republic, of that democracy, a requirement for those states to get back in. If the South wanted to play power games to deny people justice and equality, the radical Republicans could play that game too, in the name of giving justice and equality. And for a brief moment, it worked. Black senators and congressmen were elected. Integrated governments formed across the South. The Klan was crushed. Democracy was more real than it had ever been in American history, and in ways that would have horrified the founding fathers. And then, in 1877, they lost the capacity to maintain that power. The Southern states came back in, the conservatives swept to power. They pulled out the troops to resolve a disputed presidential election. They chose stability over justice, order over equality. Jim Crow quickly filled the vacuum, not gradually, but quickly. 90 years of terror followed. The moment power stopped defending the new democracy, democracy died. And we didn't see it again until 1968, the first presidential election in which everyone could vote. October 7th might be an 1876 moment. We're watching the same Republican Party that once amended the Constitution to guarantee equal protection, now surrendering to executive supremacy. We're seeing Congress, the institution the radical Republicans used to remake America, voluntarily castrate itself. When Bondi mocked the senators, she was announcing, with the withdrawal of troops announced in 1877, the federal commitment to constitutional governance is over. The forums will continue, the Senate will meet, hearings will happen, but the power has shifted. The same week as that hearing, the National Guard was deployed to Chicago, following deployments to DC and Memphis, and of course, Portland, blue cities all, regardless of what courts do after that. Here's what resistance history actually teaches. The anti-slavery resistance didn't wait for federal reform. They knew that someday slavery would end through the work of the Constitution, given the genius of the founders, was a bald-faced lie. So they built the Underground Railroad, an entire parallel infrastructure operating outside federal authority, a clandestine network of astonishing sophistication and effectiveness. Then they created their own courts through personal liberty laws, their own enforcement through vigilance committees, their own justice through direct action. The radical Republicans didn't negotiate with traitors. They captured the full force of government power and used it to crush opposition to democracy. They understood that between democracy and authoritarianism, there is no middle ground, folks. You either defend democracy with power or you lose it to power. Both movements understood the fundamental lesson. When institutions fail, and this is a thing about American history that scholars who are not scholars of American history miss about America, when institutions fail, you don't reform them, you replace them. You build counter institutions. You create alternative power centers. You make the old system irrelevant by constructing a new one alongside of it, and you're loyal to that one. Both also teach us the warning. The moment you stop defending what you've built, the moment you choose comfort over conflict, stability over justice, everything collapses. The personal liberty laws couldn't survive Dred Scott without escalating to war. Reconstruction couldn't survive without troops. And October 7th showed us this event. They're not even pretending Congress matters anymore. The executive branch has declared independence from legislative oversight, and the legislative branch has accepted it. Now, the hearing was routine oversight, part of congressional authority, but it revealed whether the Justice Department takes orders from tweets. And when asked about Trump's public order to prosecute his enemies, Bondi's response was yes, and what are you going to do about it? Nothing. That's what Grassley silence said. Nothing. That's what Republican acquiescence announced. Nothing. So, here's your main resistance history lesson, drawn from the Americans who faced this before. Stop waiting for Congress to rediscover its spine. The Wisconsin Supreme Court didn't wait for the federal Supreme Court to overturn the Fugitive Slave Act. They declared it void themselves. Stop believing the Justice Department will regulate itself. The radical Republicans didn't trust Andrew Johnson. They created their own enforcement through military districts. And stop thinking this is a political problem with a political solution. This is a power problem that requires a power response. The personal liberty laws teach us when federal laws become unjust, create alternative legal structures. The radical Republicans teach us when democracy is under attack, defending it requires using every tool of power available to you, and maybe even making up some of your own. So October 7th taught us the hardest lesson, all drawn from 1877. The moment you stop fighting, you lose everything. Not gradually, quickly, and you lose it for generations. October 7th wasn't subtle. You might have missed it, but it wasn't subtle. They showed us exactly what they are. The question now is whether we've learned what our predecessors paid in blood to teach us. Power doesn't yield to appeals. It yields only to power. And that's not saying we're cooked. Don't you dare think that we're cooked. American resistance is just getting started, and we have a whole history that we can rely on for lessons, heroes, and inspiration. Let's go get them.